Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Let's start with our new lecture, that is lecture number 14 for web technologies and programming. In today's lecture, we will discuss about the page layout. Before proceeding to the content of today's lecture, let's overview what we have studied in the previous lecture. So in the previous lecture, that is lecture number 13, we have discussed in detail different font properties. We have seen there are different attributes related to cascading style sheets, and one of the major element is font with respect to text element, and the following properties are associated for the font. The first one is font family. Font family is basically collection of specific font style. The most common font family is serif, sans serif, and the key difference between them is the edges of alphabet is present in one and excluded in other. So we have seen different font sizes as well. We have discussed in detail the font sizes. By default, on a web page, the default font size is 12 in pixel value. The font size can be also presented in millimeter, inches, and pixel as well. And we have discussed the different font weights. Font weight is basically increasing the boldness of alphabets. By increasing the boldness, the font will be increased in terms of its width. And then we have discussed different font style, and here we have seen that two characters are related for each. The one is about the height of capital character EM, and the second one is about the width of lower case alphabets. There are different font styles like Times New Roman, Calvary, Verdana, and then we have seen font variant. Font variant is basically making a font in uppercase or in lowercase. After the font properties, we have discussed the text controlling with CSS, and we have seen different selector and declare with respect to text. Selector is basically that particular web element to whom you want to control, and you can control it with different properties. You will always mention a property and colon and the value of that particular property. So the key properties for the text are, one is the word spacing. By using the word spacing, you can create space between different words. The second is letter spacing. Letter spacing is to create the space between letters. The third is line height. Line height is basically creating the space for writing words or alphabets. The next is text align, and text align is basically horizontal alignment of text in left or right or centered. The next is vertical align. The vertical line of the text is in top, bottom, centered. And then we have studied text indenting, positioning the text with respect to creating a space before the text or after the text. And then we have overviewed the text decoration, which contains underlining of text, overline the text, striking of text, the blinking of text. And then we have seen the text transformation. After that, we have overviewed style linking. Hyperlink or links can also be styled using cascading style sheets. And we have seen a different sort of styling for an active link, an unvisited link, or a visited link, as well as we'll also review the color concept for links styling. Then we have seen the background properties for a web page. We have seen that background color of a web page can be changed with this property. And then using the background image, the image of the web page can also be changed. And then we have seen the background image can be repeated or color using the repeat property. And in the end, we have seen the position where the background is to be placed. In the last of the lecture, we have discussed about styling of tables. We have seen that all the text styling and font styling can be incorporated with tables. Then we have seen the vertical alignment of the table. We have also overviewed the width of the table and height of the table, that is controllable. And then the background of a table can also be changed with respect to color, and the image can also be placed as a background for a table. So these are the contents that we have discussed in our previous lecture. What we will discuss in today's lecture? In today's lecture, we will first of all see the process to design the page layout. How to design page layout, what are its steps. And then we will overview a very important tag for page layout, that is a div tag. And then we will discuss how to code a page using divs and CSS. And in the end, we will review how to style divs and position it. Now first of all, how to lay out a web page. So in order to lay out a web page or a web application, we need to consider few concepts before the development. The first concept is connection. Connection is basically a smallest version of a social web. Social web is a category of web. And then we have considered that user can register on a social web by using the registration process that is usually given in terms of sign up form. And after the registration process, a send message is sent to the user in order to get it registered, and user can view that message that is sent it by the application. So this is basically a scenario for registering a web application, and that domain is a social web. So the process of developing such a social web for the user registration and sending message can be laid out. So the first step is we need to determine the requirements of the site. What will be the requirement of this particular site? How the requirements will be gathered? Using different requirement techniques like interview with the stakeholder, brainstorming session with the IT team, discussion with the client, a review of different features in the competitor products, and then we need to group the required information of relevant requirements accordingly. For example, all the requirements that are concerned with login are to be linked on the login site web page, and then we need to identify each and every web form element, key element for each page, and then we need to discuss in detail how we are going to lay out these web elements for each page and how each page is consistent with all other pages. So requirements को relate किया जाएगा for हर पेज के लिए, हर वेब पेज के लिए, और हर वेब पेज के अंदर इस प्रोसेस को डिज़ाइन किया जाएगा कि इसमें वेब एलिमेंट्स को कैसे डिस्प्ले किया जाए, और तमाम वेब पेजेस के ऊपर जो वेब एलिमेंट्स आते हैं उनको कैसे लेआउट किया जाएगा, और वेब पेजेस के दरमियान किस तरह कंसिस्टेंसी को अचीव किया जाएगा. सो इन दिस वे वी आर गोइंग टू डिजाइन द layout of a web page, and later on this design will be converted to the code. Determining the requirements for a web page. Understanding the audience. This is the very first step in order to extract, in order to know the right requirements. Who is the question, which means who is going to visit the website? Who will be your audience? Who will be your users? So you can create fictional visitors. If you don't know the real users, then you will create an imagination for the intended user. For example, that the intended user of your web application are men and women of 20 to 50 years of age. Similarly, we will also consider their skill of using the application, their different cognitive skills, their different abilities of using the IT technologies, their anthropology, their ethnography, that is their cultural background. So you need to know in detail who will be your audience of your website, what will be their gender, what will be their age, what sort of skills they have for IT tools and technologies, what sort of cognitive skills they possess, what are their cultural backgrounds, what is the purpose they want to use your website. So now, considering that, why they will use your site, this is the second question in order to extract the proper valid requirements. So they will use your site, for example, as you are going to send message to them, and they can receive the message from your site. So this is, for example, a unique feature in your application. So you are considering that due to this feature, the intended users are going to use your application. So you have to justify with the implementation reasons that will be in terms of your application requirements for which your intended users are going to use your application. The next question will be what? What does a intended user or a visitor need to achieve a goal on your website? Do the users will be aware of your features? Will the user are already familiar with such sort of product or your product? Are you going to provide users with detailed user manuals and guidelines in order to use your website efficiently? So you need to know that what tasks user is going to perform on your website. The next is you need to know in order to determine the requirement is how often can you realistically expect them to visit. Number of times a user will request the required resource on your website. Does the user will come daily or weekly or monthly? So you need to know when the user will ping your website, when the user will contact your website. So why you need to have such sort of information? So that you know that when users are not using your site or less number of users is using your site, so that in that time you can modify, you can update the new features or enhancement in your website. And this is also a necessary point to be considered in order to determine the requirements for website. Now, things you want the site to do. You want the requirements of the owner of the site which are usually not listed, not given. So for that you need to know that user must register themselves on your website in order to sending and receiving of messages functionality. So user must register on your site. In this way you will come to know who is the particular owner of the site, and in this way they are listed. So after getting the answers of who was the audience, what they will do, how they will perform, what features you will provide, what actions they will do, so you will categorize the requirements in particular pages. So all the requirements that are related to a particular page, you will add all the requirements logically on one page. For example, you want the user to get registered for your web application, and you want the user to log in on your web application. So you are attaching the registration information and login information in the home page. Similarly, you want the user information and all the recent messages detailed in the user page, and in inbox will contain all the received message for the user, and outbox will contain all the message that was sent to the user, and send a message form will contain a form through which user can send a message. So in this way the related information is grouped on a particular web page. So you have basically extracted the requirements, and then the required requirements are logically related, and that logically related requirements are mapped to the particular web page, as we have seen for the 5 pages currently. So now, after grouping the and categorizing the requirements to a web page, we are going to make a site map. Site map basically shows how many pages you will require for your website, number of pages कितने होंगे आपके साइट के, and which page which relate with other page, and pages आपस में कैसे linked होंगे, कैसे relate किए जाएंगे. और यूजुअली ये जो पेजेस का स्ट्रक्चर है ये एक फैमिली ट्री की तरह बनाया जाता है, या जिस तरह एक कंप्यूटर में फोल्डर्स का स्ट्रक्चर होता है, मेन फोल्डर, उसके अंदर सब फोल्डर, इस अंदाज में डिजाइन और डेवलप किया जाता है. So this is the way to create a site map for the web pages for a particular website. So if you do consider over here, there is a home page and there is a user page, and using some web form element on the home page, you can link with the user page, and on the user page there are 3 sub pages: inbox, outbox, and send a message. So for all these pages we already know the requirement of each page, and in this slide all the structure of web pages is linked, and it shows the overall website linked in structure. What are the key elements for each web page? For every web page there are some common sections. The first section is header section. In header section and navigation section and footer section, these are the common section for each web page on a website. Header is usually presented on the top, and footer is presented in the bottom of the web page, and navigation section is presented below the header section. Then for each web page there are as well some specific sections, and that page specific sections are, for example, on home page there are specific section of login or registration. Similarly, for the user page there are some specific sections. For example, there is a user information, and there are recent message information. So there are 2 categories of sections. One is common section, and the second one is page specific section. The common section is presented on all pages, while the specific section is presented on specific pages. Similarly, if you do consider, the specific section of the user page also includes inbox page, outbox page, and send message page, where inbox page will contain receive message information, outbox page will contain message sent by the user, and send message page will have the information of a form in order to send a message to some other user. Now, how to arrange the elements on pages? So if you do consider over here, this is basically a home page, and if you do see over here that a background, the page size is mentioned in terms of blue color, and on the top of it a section for logo is created, and it shows the logo, particularly logo area, and in the right there is a header area where you will mention the header information on your website, and in the below there is orange color which shows basically footer of your application, and in the center there is a a login form information, and in the down view of the center view there is a sign in form information, and all these sections, logo section, header section, login form, sign in form and footer section are mapped on a web page. So this is the one style of arranging elements on pages. So if you do consider another arrangement of elements on a user page, then on the top of it there is a header section and a logo section, and in the bottom there is a footer section. So these are the generic section which will appear on each web page, whereas the other section are just appearing on this user page. For example, in the green color it shows that it is user information page, where user information and picture will appear, and on the right side, that is aqua blue color, is showing user data, and in the center down area the dark red is showing all the actions of the user that will appear. For example, receive message, send message, and similarly compose message. And while on the right frame it will appear with the recent message detail. So for each web page we have seen there are different sections, general sections, and there are specific sections. So how we have layout, we have seen that general sections are mostly on the top and on the bottom, and they will remain same on all the web pages, while the specific sections for each page vary from page to page according to the need. Now, how to translate design into code? For translating a design into code, there are three different ways. The first one that we need to know is there are two types of design: liquid design versus fixed design. The second one is the div tag, and we will discuss the div tag in detail. And the third one is coding the design. So let's consider the first tag, that is liquid design. Let's consider the first one, that is the liquid design. Liquid design automatically fits on the screen of the user, and user gives the percentage values to mention the height and width of the section. So by using the percentage, height and width of the section can be controlled. This is said to be liquid design. While for fixed design, design width will remain fixed, and we use fixed values to declare the height and width of the section. So when we are using percentage in order to declare the height and width, we are using liquid design, and when we are using values in order to declare height and width, we are mentioning fixed design. So this is the first way of translating design into code. The second one is the div tag. The div tag is basically used to create the skeleton, the structure of the page. And the div tag should not display any specific information in XHTML document. And the goal of the div tag is to separate the information from the layout and presentation of the page. And layout of the page is completely controlled by cascading style sheets. And here we prefer the cascading style sheet should be external cascading style sheet. So the div tag is basically used to define a division or a section in an HTML document. So on a web page, you divide different sections before development, and that division of section is basically done with the help of div tag. The div tag is also used to group block elements and to format them with CSS. So we have different block elements that are also grouped with div tag in order to format them with cascading style sheet. Always remember, the div tag element is very commonly used with CSS in order to lay out the web page. And by default, all the browser always place a line break before and after the div tag element. But you can also change this line break before and after the div tag using the CSS file. Now, what are the major sections of the web page? For any web page, these are the major sections. The top of the page contains the masthead that will contain logo and title of the web page, and then there will be menu that will be used for navigational purpose, and then the content is presented normally in the right side of the web page that will show about for which particular purpose this web page is or this particular website is maintained for. And on the left side towards the content, the search option is given with single search box or with multiple filters in order to extract the required information. And in the bottom of the web page, a footer information is given. Please consider, do not divide your web page with so many divs. Don't make many sections. Don't overload the web page. Create a very structured and well formatted and well organized divs. And also, you don't need to worry about the positioning of divs while executing in XHTML. The div tag again is creating a container, a section in an HTML document, and we can format that particular section. We can use different sort of styling for that particular section accordingly, and by default a section is not formatted itself, and usually a group of block level tags is logically used to format it. And don't try to use it to group tags that are not block level tags. There are some block level tags and there are some non-block level tags. The tags which are not block level tags, please don't try to use them on a particular container. What is the way to declare a div tag? A div tag can be declared by giving the start tag of the div and then the required information and then the end tag of the div tag. Any block level tag can have its width and height set. So if you want to know what is the block level tag, as we have discussed in the previous slide, so always remember a block level tag can have its width and height set. Be careful especially with respect to height, because if the text exceeds the size of the allocated area, then unpredictable things might occur, like alignment can be disturbed. For example, the body to 75% of the width of the browser window is given. So see, the width is given 75%. So the application will not give a reasonable look and feel and view and layout to the user. Now float attribute. You can use the float attribute either right or left. Text is aligned around the block level tag using the float, and either the float will be right or left. Similarly, there is another option that is clear, that you can clear for right, left or both. So it prevents a floating element from appearing along a block level element. So using the clear, the float element will not appear for a block level content. Now see the example of div tag. We are going to create an HTML code file. HTML start tag is written, then HTML head is mentioned, then title of the web page using div is given, head tag is ended, body started, and div tag is mentioned inside the body tag. So see, start of the div tag is mentioned, then for CSS style is given, the background color is mentioned, that is gray, and this is the first section, and div tag is closed. So this is the div style. Now the div style is background color red, another section, and this is the second section, and this is the second div of the web page, and div tag is closed. The second section div tag is closed, then body is closed, and then HTML tag for ending the web page document. Now see what is the output of it. The first div tag, this is the first div tag on the top, and then the second div tag after the first div tag where it is written this is the second section. So in this way you are creating different divs on your web page. Now the third concept, how to code the design. Here the div will also carry on while designing and then coding the design. First of all, we have to mention the div ID that we want to design, and as I already said you that each div is basically a container. Then the div ID, that is a header section, and then the div ID logo is mentioned. So the brown color is basically the header section, and the yellow color is basically the logo section, and the div is then closed. So the header divs end and container divs end over here as well. So now moving ahead, we are coding the design and we are mentioning some more divs over here. Header and logo divs are now centered content. So div ID first is centered content, the second div ID is form container, and the third div class is form heading. So in the heading section the div class is form rows, and then for all the form elements there are mentioned the relevant divs. Then div is closed for the header section, and then accordingly divs are closed for the div class, div ID for form container, and div ID for the container document. So in this way the more divs are created over here. So we are coding towards the design. Now one step ahead, header and section logo section is already created using the divs. Now we are adding more divs in our design using the form container and form header onward. So here you can see that again a div ID container is created, then header and logo divs are mentioned, then div ID center content is mentioned. Now login form for the div and registration form for the div is contained, and then end of the container content center, and then the footer div is created, and then footer div is closed, and then container divs end in the end. So we are adding different divs step by step in our web page document slowly, and we are also reviewing different divs, the alignments and the positioning as well. So div always required to make the structure. So what will be the structure for a div? The first one will always is a main container, then there will be a header section, then there is a logo div, then there is a center container div, and after that there will be form container div, and then a form heading and form row. So this is the way the divs are required to make the structure for different sections on a web page. Let's see the first main container code. So in the HTML body, the background color is mentioned with the color hash code, and then for the container code, that is main container, the relevant attributes are mentioned. The height is given with the value auto, the width is given with 80%, and then the margin is left, that is 10%, and the border is mentioned 2 pixels, and border color is mentioned with the border color code. The div is closed, and then the hash header is used and its particular attributes are given, that is the next div. Now let's see the header div. The header div is started with the width is given 100% for the header, and height is given 18%. So the values is given in terms of percentage over here. Now the background is mentioned URL, and the URL is from the images directory, and it is a sub local directory, and the header.jpg image is referred, and then the header should be repeated. Yes, so repeat is written, and then the background position of the header is given 0 pixel and space with the 0 pixel, the coordinates, and then the margin is given auto. Now the next div, that is the logo div. In the logo div, the logo div is declared, then the floating value that is left assigned for the block content, then a padding of 0 pixel is mentioned, then height and width of the logo section div is given in terms of percentage, and after that there is a center content div. So if you do consider, there is a center content div, and then the height ratio is mentioned auto, and width is given in terms of percentage, and background color is mentioned with hash code of the color. Now the next div is form container div. For the form container div, the padding is mentioned 10 pixel. The height is given in terms of point now. So do consider that before all the height given for all the section are before is in terms of percentage. Here you find the difference, that height is given in terms of pixels for the form heading section, and then font family is mentioned. The font family is given Calvary, and then the color property is mentioned as white, and then font weight is given as bold, and font size is given in terms of pixels, that is 26 pixel, and finally the background color with hash code is mentioned. Moving ahead, we have div form row, or in div form row we have mentioned the padding of 5 points and height of 25 pixels. So padding and height both is given in terms of pixels. Now the style labeling. So label is given, and what will be the attributes for the style labeling? Font family is used as Calibri, and then font size of 12 pixel is mentioned, and then padding is mentioned 10 pixels, and width of 200 pixel is mentioned, and float is mentioned left, and font weight is mentioned bold. So this will be the label properties for the styling. And then last, input is mentioned, float characteristics is mentioned in the left, height is again given in terms of pixels, and width is again given in terms of pixels. So now adding a space after the divs. So for the space, if you do consider, it is mentioned div dot space, and then height is created, that how much space is to be added, that is 10 pixel. And in the end there is a footer section. The footer section mentions the margin on the top, that is 10 pixel, so much margin should be created, and the color for the footer section will be white. Color property value is white. You are directly giving the color over here, or you can use the hash code as well, and the text is aligned center for the footer. And then if you do see, very good example over here, that height is given as 30 pixel and width is given in terms over here 100%, and then background color is given in 55,000, that is about the footer background color. So this is again all about footer div. So I'm going to back slides for reviewing all the code once. So starting from the main container, we have mentioned the main container and border color is the same. Then moving towards header section, we have given all the height, background, repeat, position and margin. Then moving towards, we have mentioned the code for the logo div, and after the logo div we have moved towards the center content, and after the center content the div for form container is mentioned, and after the form container we have mentioned the div of form heading, and then the form row is created, and then styling for the label is mentioned, and then styling for the input field of form is mentioned, and then a div space is created using 10 pixel height, and finally the footer div is created. Here you can clearly see all the div attributes are used in different ways. So now moving in the end, the last is how we are going to call all this in our application. So this is the HTML file, head section is started, then the title is given, connection to home page, and title tag is ended. Then we are referencing style.css, the div tag styling sheet, and then its type, that is text and CSS, as its relation, that is style sheet. Head section is closed. Now the body tag is started, and here the first div ID, that is container, this is the first div ID that we have designed in the style, is mentioned. Then the second div ID, that is header div, is mentioned. Then the third div ID, that is the logo div ID, is mentioned. And for logo, we want that our logo should be displayed, an image should be displayed. That's why we are giving an image source equals to images/logo.jpg, and then height of that particular logo is mentioned in over here, that height is in pixel 116, and then width of the image is also mentioned, that is 170 pixels, and the div tag is closed for the logo over here. Then the div tag for the header is closed, and in the end the div tag for the container is ended. So the three divs for the header are mentioned over here. So now see what is going to have the output on the user page. So this is the header section, and in the left side there is a logo section where connection.jpg is presented, and then on the right side is container div. Now moving onward, we have some center content start div. Then the next is we are calling form container class for the div, and then we are creating the form heading class div, and we are mentioning the label user login for that particular div. Now the form is going to be started. The form starts, the div class form row is added, and then the label your ID is mentioned for that particular form row, and then an input file type text is presented with name ID, and then a row ends for particular div, and then form container div is ended, and finally the container content div is ended with the / div tag. So now what is the output of it? See, user login is mentioned. So two fields, your ID is mentioned, and your password is mentioned, and its relevant login button is mentioned. So in this way we can have the second div for login area. Now moving ahead, we have added another div. See, the class div that is called and mentioned with space attribute value, and then the div class form container is given, and then again form header is given, that is user registration, and form is started. Div class first the form row is added, and then the label that you want to appear is your full name is mentioned, and then input type file text is mentioned. So this is all about form row, and then the second div class is started. So the label is your email address, and input type is text and name email. So div tag is closed. So what is the output? You are creating user registration, then your full name and your email address. So that particular fields are appearing accordingly, and you can see the relevant divs container over here. You can also put the required validations, like required, you want to mention some placeholder, you want to give the length, min and max, you want the user to put the specific required input in a specific pattern using the regular expression. So you can also add different checkboxes, radio boxes. You can also mention over here the necessary label. So you can also add a submit button, a reset button, or a upload file button over here as mentioned as well in the screen. So you can use different form level elements over here inside the div particularly. So moving ahead, now the next is footer div. So after the registration we have started a new div, that is the footer div, and we have mentioned the special character over here for writing the copyright information in the footer div, all rights reserved, and the div tag is closed. So what will be the output of this footer div? See, the footer div is appeared and it is referring see all rights reserved. How the color is over here? It is taken from the style sheets that the footer div is referring to. So in this way we are developing a layout for a web page. We are designing a web page layout using different divs. We are defining all the divs and the styling in the CSS files, and then we are referring that CSS style files in our HTML application, and there we are using web form elements, and using that web form elements with styling we are fulfilling all the required divs in the step-by-step process. So what we have learned in today's section? Today's we have first of all learned the process to design a page layout. Here we have seen in order to design a web page we necessarily need to know the requirements. So we need to know what are the requirements. For knowing the requirements we need to know who will be the audience or intended user of our application, and then we have discussed how the user are going to perform a task on our website, and then why the user is going to stay on our application, what are those features due to which a user is going to use our application, and at what time the user is going to use our application. So for this we created a scenario. For that we are assuming a small mini social web in which a home page, a user page, and using a user page a user can send and receive or compose a message screen will be appeared that user can send. So we have imagined and intended users are of 20 and 50 years, 20 to 50 years, and they are of male and female gender. And then we have known that when they will use, so that when we have to modify the site we can modify in that time when user is using the website in less peak hours. So all the related requirements are then logically linked, and that related requirements are then grouped together, and that are grouped together on a particular web page. So for home page there is a login section, there is a registration section. Similarly for user page there is a receive message, send message, and create a message section. There are different categorization, and we are grouping each requirement to each web page. And then we have seen that what will be the structure of a web page and what will be the structure of website. So requirements are creating the structure for a web page, and web page are linked in a structure just like directories or a tree like structure. Then we have seen the key elements for each page. We have seen the common key elements for each page, and then specific key elements for each page. We have seen that in our example logo, header and footer will be the generic section that will appear on our all web pages, while for each web page there are some specific section as well. Like for a user page there are send message, receive message section. Proceeding onwards, we have discussed how to translate design into code. For that we have seen that there are two basic types of design, liquid versus fixed design. In liquid design we mention all the values in percentage for height and width, while in fixed design we mention all the values in fixed values. Then we have discussed the div tag in detail. We have seen what is the div tag. The div tag is basically a tag that creates section in a web page document, and we have seen the div tag can be used with some other additional attributes, and div tag is normally used with the CSS, and div tag can be represented by start div tag and end div tag. And then we have seen that using the div tag we can lay out a web page, and we have seen that a web page is layout by div tag with different divs like logo div, header div, container div, footer div, search div. So there are different divs are created using the div tag. So after the creation of different divs on a web page, we have seen that for each div we can apply the relevant styling, and relevant styling includes all the attributes of font and text accordingly, and also the attributes or properties of designs that are applied in styling, and that CSS, external CSS, is referred with divs in the HTML web page. And finally, we have seen that how to code the design using divs and CSS. For that, we have seen a detailed example in which we have discussed each and every line of all the code for divs, and then we have reviewed our code output, and we have seen that how a web page is designed using div, and with each div we have used different web elements like text box, search box, radio box. These options can be used, checkbox can be used, input types can be used, and similarly with the properties of read only, disable property, placeholder property, labels, it can be used. And the divs can also be positioned and resize. They can be increased, they can be decreased using height and width property. So this is all about we have discussed in today's lecture. Thank you for today's lecture.